of how this acknowledgement looks along with the date and timestamp on it. I will show it in the upcoming slides. So remember these two, the XML file format and the acknowledgement. It will come up and I will show it to you. So this acknowledgement, once received into the sponsor's inbox, is when the case is considered submitted. Until then, it is not. Now, if you have questions of why there's a small black box that's called header attached, a few years ago, let's say around 6 to 8 years ago, there was a requirement that every file that passes through from the sponsor end to the FDA, it required a header to be attached. Now, this header is something very similar to the subject line of your email. When you are writing your email, you give a gist of what the topic of the entire email is all about. So this header would talk about what trial this adverse event is from, what location, what, let's say whether it was post-marketing, clinical trial, all the details about this trial. And it would not talk about the adverse event as itself, but it would give you the location. Let's say this particular trial was held somewhere in Mississippi. It would give you that, and then it would give you that it is from an oncology trial, it is from Pfizer. It would have its own naming convention according to the FDA's requirements. And you had to follow this requirement or this standard naming procedure. Now, why this was dropped over a period of time was there was increased number of cases where the cases that the XML files that were transmitted to the FDA, though completely properly processed, it used to fail transmission and submission. And one of the main or most common reasons were people were making a lot of mistakes in attaching the header. When you do not follow the naming conventions, like even if you miss a small underscore while you have a big long naming convention, then the file would be failed. It would not transmit and it would not reach to the FDA. So to avoid all this confusion and waste of time, the FDA came about removing the header and transmitting the file as it is. Okay. So these are some of the examples of the naming conventions. Now, this is just for your knowledge so that you get an idea of how this naming convention looks. It's going to make things easier. You will not be wondering when you get into a job that you know the theoretical part that there is a naming convention and all that, but you haven't actually seen it. So this is how the naming convention will be. If you miss one small bracket, if you change the bracket, if you miss an underscore, if you miss a dash, if you make a forward slash into a backward slash, you do any of these, that would not be transmitted. Okay, so every company will have their own naming conventions. In one particular company, there might be many clinical trials, many different projects. Each project again will have their own requirements. What you do for an oncology trial might differ from what you do for a respiratory trial. Okay, so there is no point in memorizing. Nothing is going to be the same. When you get hired into a company, you will be thoroughly trained before you go live into the project. Okay, so don't worry about it. Just remember that it's going to have all of these special characters in the naming conventions. Okay, which letter should be capitalized, which letter should be a small letter. All of these together make your naming conventions. Now, related to Argus E2B reporting, usually you have all these details in your Argus data handling manual. Now, that's a big book which will give you all the steps in details, and you are not required to read this book end to end because anyways, you're not going to remember it at the end of the day. All that matters to you is what you do on a daily basis, and that's going to be more or less monotonous. You're going to follow this and this step. Okay, you'll get an adverse event coming in. You're going to put in to start triaging. Some companies have their own triaging team. Some companies make their PV specialists or PV associates. They move on rotation into a triaging department. where they say, okay, every fourth